Hello, welcome to our Dream to Rise podcast. And I am so excited to share with you another guest, a special guest who is a seasoned martial artist, dedicated women's self defense instructor, and passionate advocate for empowering women to live confidently and fearlessly. With over 2 decades of martial arts experience, including a fourth Dan black belt in Taekwondo and a first Dan black belt in Hapkido, she has transformed her personal journey of resilience into a mission to uplift others. Wonderful. As the founder of Pretty Hands Hard Punches, she uses her own experiences overcoming abuse and exploitation within the martial arts industry to teach women practical self defense techniques, boundary setting, and how to recognize and stand against abuse. Her unique approach combines technical skill, emotional intelligence, and empowerment to help women build physical and mental strength. Without further ado, my dear listeners, let us welcome Elicia Ybarra. Welcome, Elicia.
Thank you so much for having me. And this is the type of podcast that is just near and dear to my heart because I think a lot of times with our roadblocks that we set up for ourselves and our own limiting beliefs, it becomes very difficult to follow our own personal dreams and where we want to go in life, and we get stagnant in that moment. And so I am extremely excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, same here. It's an honor to have you here, my dear. Okay, let's get started. I would just like to ask you, can you tell us something about yourself that brought you to where you are right now? Your story, that's what we're hoping to hear from you.
Absolutely. I'm a lifelong martial artist. I began training at the age of 6 years old. A lot of times I was the only girl or female student in the class. And it was my goal at a very young age to open my own martial arts school and be the head instructor. And that was before I understood gender roles, traditional gender roles, or the roadblocks that were going to come ahead of as I hit puberty for me. And so I spent 17 years straight working towards my one goal of opening and owning my own martial arts school. But as I hit puberty and I got into becoming a black belt and doing competitions, what I found was that there was a lot of hidden abuse within the martial arts industry that I began to experience. So as I hit puberty, I was groomed by my martial arts instructor. I was 13 years old. He was 21 when he started grooming me. And by the time I was 16, he was having sex with me and blaming me for tempting and seducing him. And that really alienated me from my peers. And it had detrimental effects on my mental and emotional well-being. I had no idea how to place value on myself because I was so obsessed with being what this man wanted me to be that I began to second guess everything in my life that made me happy. So by the time I was 16, I was already being abused. I went directly from being 16 and being abused to another very inappropriate relationship with a grown man. I was 16, he was 23 at the time. I moved out of my parents' house and I focused on graduating high school. I still trained in martial arts at the time, but I wasn't out of school. I was just doing private lessons for students that I had already previously had. And at 18 years old, empowered and emboldened by deciding to leave my hometown, I took a professional martial arts teaching job in Southern California, where it was 6 hours away from my hometown. That was in Northern California. And immediately I was introduced to the boss's son, where I began dating him. And I ended up in a very highly controlled and emotional and mental abusive relationship where it wasn't the boyfriend, it was his dad who had all of the power and control over my life at the time. From 18 to 21, this man controlled every aspect of my life, including my finances, my college choice, everything I did with my free time. And he spent those 3 years really breaking me down. And instead of training me to be the head instructor and own my own martial arts school, which had always been my goal, I realized when the bubble finally burst that I was not being trained to be a martial arts instructor. I was being trained to be the wife of a martial arts instructor. So I was being trained how to silently, submissively, and humbly support my husband in his dreams and goals while I maintained the household. And at that time in my life, I was 20 years old. That wasn't what I was interested in. My goal was to open and run my own school. So I ended up becoming blackballed from the industry and really being in the gutter. I had to move back to my hometown. I spent my whole 21st year of life just partying and trying to forget the trauma I had endured. And that led me into an extremely abusive and violent, toxic relationship from 21 to 22, where I met a man who swept me off my feet and told me he loved me and said all the right things and really love bombed me to the point where I thought that I had finally found the right man for me. And as soon as he had me isolated from my friends and family and financially dependent on him, he began to physically abuse me. And as I faced that abuse, because of what I had endured throughout my adolescence and into early adulthood, I believed I deserved it. I didn't fight back because I felt like this is what I deserved for being such a failure of a traditional wife and a friend and an instructor. So by the time I ended that relationship, it was 18 months of toxicity. And I had caught him cheating and he beat the hell out of me, in all honesty. And I ended up having to fight for my own life that night. When that happened, I realized that I needed to make some very drastic changes in my life. So I left that toxic relationship, got myself into college. The wounds on the outside and the physical wounds, they healed. And I took the trauma without understanding trauma and I locked it up into a box. And I moved on with my life. I graduated college. I met and married a man who taught me what true love was and what a healthy relationship looked like. And he's an incredible husband. And then we had a baby. And once we had that child, our son, all of the trauma triggers and all the trauma that I had endured in all those years, they began to develop into postpartum depression and severe depression. And so I spent all of the first year my son was alive feeling inadequate, like a failure as a woman and a mother and a wife, like I was a bad person and I made bad decisions and I didn't deserve the happiness that I was feeling. And that was detrimental again to my mental health. So when my son turned 2, I got into therapy and I decided that I did not want my son to see the weak woman that I felt like I was. And I began to make slow, small changes in my life to help me build the confidence in order to truly heal from the trauma that I had had. And as I was healing from that, I realized that so many women must face the same thing I've gone through in one way or another, especially domestic abuse and domestic violence survivors. And I started thinking, how can I help these women? How can I help women not get involved with men like that in the first place? And if they have, realized that they are worth being more and their value is predicated on what they believe in themselves, not what they've been told by very abusive, douchebaggy people. And so I developed my business, Pretty Hands, Hard Punches, as an empowerment self-defense model to teach women how to understand their own value and their own self-worth. And so I am currently in therapy and healing from the trauma that I had endured throughout my early adolescence and into early adulthood.
Wow. Wow. You've gone through so much. Now, now you're teaching people, especially the women who were abused, because you've gone through a lot of relationships. How would you now describe uh, the person, the guy or the man who is truly in love with you and not an abusive? Because for me, it's hard, no? I've gone through that as well. And I put on my walls. Now, when I meet someone, it's just, I have my walls because I'm scared to experience the same thing. But how would you know now that your husband was, because before, oh, they were the best person, they love you so much. And how would you differentiate which one is true and which one is not? will it take some time before you will discover it, or can you guard
Absolutely.
yourself from the start?
One of the things that I did with this relationship, and I've been with my husband for going on 13 or 14 years now. I don't know
Okay.
math. So
Uh-huh.
we've been together for a very long time. But I didn't jump into the relationship the way that I had done previously. I didn't believe everything he said right off the bat. He proved it to me over time by treating me as a partner and an equal. And that is something that I had never experienced in any of my past relationships. I was always treated like I was inadequate and I was not good enough. And I was constantly striving to be good enough to be with that person. As in this healthy relationship, in this healthy marriage, my husband treated me like a partner from the very beginning. He treated me as his equal. He respected my boundaries. He respected my feelings. And he was transparently honest with me, even when he knew that it was going to hurt me, it was going to upset me, or I was not going to be happy about what he was being honest with. He never lied to me. He never disrespected me. And even when we would argue, even when we would fight, he would take the initiative and say, how do we want to fix this? There was never any physical abuse, and he never berated me. One of the things that I hadn't experienced until I got with my husband now, my current husband. I only have one. I only ever had one. um, with my husband now is that when we would argue and when we would fight, he would recognize that he needed to walk away. And there was never any demeaning wording. There was never any threats. There was never any type of abusive language. He's never ever called me a bitch in the entire time we've been together, no matter how angry I've made him, and I have made him plenty angry. He has always just walked away until we were ready to talk. And I think that when you're a young woman or a woman who is a DV survivor and you're looking at possibly dating again, you have to watch how they handle their anger. How does he handle being in traffic? How does he handle when things are going wrong? How does he handle when a waitress gets his food wrong? And when you start to look, you start to pay attention to how those stressful situations are handled. And a man who can't control his emotions, his anger, it will show in those times. And that's when it's so important for women to not dismiss those as a one-time thing. When a man shows you his true colors, you believe it. And for me, my husband's true colors have always been love and respect and treating me as I am his equal and his partner. And even when I didn't have a job or there was a power dynamic that was unequal in our relationship, especially after we had a child and I wasn't working, I was a stay-at-home mom, it was our money. It was not his money. If we were having a debt problem, it was our problem. It was not his problem that he had to give me or teach me a lesson. There was never any type of power dynamics where I wasn't treated like his partner. And that is, to me, one of the main green flags when it comes to my relationship that I talk about. Your spouse is not your caretaker. They're not your boss. They're not your manager. They're not your leader. They are your partner. Now, if you choose, like I choose to let my husband lead our family, it is a choice that I make. But when it comes to decision making and big decision making, I am a part of all of those big decisions. He does not spend more than $100 without talking to me, the same way I do not spend more than $100 without talking to him. The rules are equal for both of us. If he can do it, I can do it. If I can do it, he can do it. Those are the types of things when we're looking at new relationships that you should try to make sure are happening in an equal manner. If he's going out on a boys' night, you should be able to go out on a girls' night. If he's going out to eat for lunch, you should be able to go out to eat to lunch. If he is, talking to women, you should be able to talk to men if there's that trust and open communication. If there's one thing that your partner is doing that you're not allowed to do, in my opinion, that is a red flag.
Oh, yes. And that's a sign of control already. Yes.
Absolutely.
Uh-huh. And I got stuck in that because I was letting it go because I thought he loves me. He cares for me. So but it was the wrong sign of wrong way of showing love. And it's hard to go out from that kind of situation, especially in the Philippines. We don't have divorce. So you get stuck in that situation and you try to work things out, really. So,
And abusers, they practice and hone their skill. If you're like in the Philippines, they know that they only need to be nice until you're at the altar. Once that's done, they can be however they want. And I think the same thing, maybe on, I would say like a less scale in the United States happens also, where they love bomb you and they do everything that you want out of a man. You think that you've like won the lottery, and then they slowly start to show you their true self. And then after the wedding, once you're theirs, you become their property. The mindset for a lot of men is that if you're my wife, you're my property. If you're my wife, you do what I say. And what I tell young women is love is not control. Power is not love. When you have power dynamics that are so different in relationships, and that's used against you in any way, that man does not love you. He loves himself, and he wants you as a prize. He wants you to be submissive, and he wants you to do what he wants. And even if you're in a traditional marriage, even if you're a traditional stay-at-home mom, you should still have a say in how the finances are handled. You should still have budget meetings. You should still have a say in what is purchasing or where you're living or what you're doing. It shouldn't be, I make the money, you do as you're told. That's not a true loving marriage. That is a controlled situation.
I agree, totally agree. And also in terms of disciplining children, they that's always a big a problem in terms of follow my way, even though it's too strong. I mean, you're too aggressive with the children. Sometimes you have to go in and then to save the children as well, and that's what happened to me as well. It was hard. It was hard. So what tools? You mentioned that you did a therapy. You had a therapy, attended this therapy. What other tools did you do to really overcome that that trauma? And then now you've gone through that phase.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was able to successfully pull myself out of the depression and begin to start my own business. And the ways that I did that was by concentrating on myself and my self-care. And that didn't mean, neglecting my husband or neglecting my child. It meant that I placed value on myself, and I began to find small pockets of time for that self-care that I needed to make me feel better. And one of the things that I always recommend, if you wake up and you feel the depression coming, you wake up and you feel pure sadness and you can barely get out of bed, go outside, change your scenery. Don't sit in the dark room, because in the dark room, your mind is going to go to a dark place. Go outside. Go rake some leaves, walk around the block, take your child to the park, just get out into the sunlight. And that is what really changed my dynamic. I also started to look at the people that I was allowing in my life and around me, and I realized I was around a lot of very toxic people where, what we did was drink alcohol, smoke cigarettes, and, talk shit. Like that was what we were doing. And when I realized that that was having detrimental effects on my mental health, I began to distance myself from that toxicity. I quit smoking cigarettes. I quit drinking hard alcohol. Instead of waking up in the morning and going outside to smoke a cigarette, I would wake up in the morning and make a cup of tea and watch a TED Talk about mindset. And I did that for a year every morning. And then when I would still feel the doom and gloom, I would get my son dressed and we would go to the park or we would walk around the block. And some days there were times where we would go to the park and we'd come back and the doom and gloom would hit me again, and we would go around the block, and he was having a great old time. We were always out and about doing something, but it was because I was trying to change my mindset. And then I began to look internally at myself and to what I could do. What are the things that I love to do? What are the things that make me feel complete? And one of those things was painting. I enjoy paint by numbers. So I bought the cheapest paint by numbers I could because me and my husband didn't have a whole lot of money at the time and I didn't want to spend, a lot. I bought a $5 paint by number on Amazon and I began to work on that. And I started slowly to build these habits that made me feel happy in myself. And then I started to focus my energy on how I wanted my son to be raised. I grew up in a very chaotic, unsafe household where there was abuse, there was alcoholism, there was neglect. And I wanted to make sure my son never experienced any of that. And so I began to make sure that everything in my house was a safe space for him. And when it came to parenting and discipline, me and my husband often would sit down and talk about how we wanted to handle discipline, how we wanted to handle when our son got upset us, when we needed to tag team it, and my husband needed to step in because I was going to lose my ever loving mind. And those are the types of hard discussions you should be having with a potential spouse or a spouse. It shouldn't be in the moment that you're having these conversations. It should be before you ever get there. For me, I realized very early on that when I was spanking my son, and I did spank him, I was doing it to make myself feel better. I wasn't trying to teach him a lesson. I could not control my own anger, and I was spanking my child to make me feel better. And I immediately stopped. To this day, I don't spank my son because I recognize that, and I have found alternatives that help me get my point across to my child. He's 6 now. And there's no need to spank him. Usually I just take the switch away and that's
Yes.
punishment enough. But at that time, he was around 1 or 2. I was in a very, very dark mental place. And I realized that placing my hand anywhere near my child was detrimental to his mental health and my mental health. And so I didn't. And me and my husband had multiple talks about, how we wanted to punish or discipline our child. And really neither of us have ever spanked him more than that first, like maybe year where we were swatting him on the butt. And now it's a matter of, we really encourage through positivity because my son has ADHD and I also have ADHD, and spanking does nothing for children with ADHD, just so your listeners know. It's all about positive reinforcement and rewards.
Yes.
And so for me, it was really, circling back to the changing of the mindset. It was really recognizing things that I wanted to change in myself. And then one by one, slowly changing each thing that I didn't like. If I didn't like that I was waking up in the morning smoking a cigarette, how do I change that? If I didn't like the way I was disciplining my child, how do I change that? If I didn't like, my body, how do I change that? And that is where you start to gain confidence and power in your ability to know what is best for you, where your worth and value lies.
Wonderful, wonderful. I agree with all the tools which you just shared. And just to add, I also added journaling, wherein I always list down what am I grateful for, because
Yes.
because most of the time I feel bad, I feel guilty, I feel not I feel worthless because being judged by other people. But hey, you were created here on earth with a gift, and that gift should be developed and should be shared to other people, and that is your light. And the moment I always list in my gratitude list what am I grateful for, I became fuller, freer, and I feel abundant. That's it. And the same, what you have suggested, I did all those things as well. To change the energy, go out. I
Yeah.
go to the gym, yes. And then I'll be with nature, because when you're close to nature, you feel blessed. And that's
Yes,
how you feel
absolutely.
abundant. Yes.
I also did
Wonderful.
journaling and grateful
Yes.
journaling. I also did. And one of the other things that I'll mention too, really quick, was one of the TED Talks I watched, and I can't remember the name of the guy that did it. It was years ago, but it always stuck with me. He said, when you have a negative mindset, there's 2 things you should do. You should ask yourself these 2 questions. Are my thoughts useful? And how do they behave? And that
Mhm.
way you get into the habit when you're in that mindset and you're in that negative thought cycle and you are feeling the doom and gloom, you can pull yourself out and change the way you're thinking by asking, is this a useful thought? Is
Mhm.
blame, shaming, and guilting myself a useful thought for what I'm trying to do right now? And how is it behaving? Is it making me feel better about myself or is it making me feel worse? And as you do that, the reason I feel like it's so powerful is because it brings a level of thought into cliche thinking that becomes cycles. When you feel less than and inadequate and you're dealing with something like depression and you feel like you're just being hit by wave after wave of toxicity and negativity, you have to do something a little more drastic in order to get your mindset to shift. Are my thoughts useful and how do they behave makes you truly dissect what is happening in your brain, and it allows you to think about what you could be grateful for, to think about that it's not behaving in a productive or a good way for you. And it allows you to change that mindset internally. And then it becomes a habit. Then the moment that a negative thought starts to happen, is this a useful thought? No. Is it behaving well? No. And you can easily dismiss it. And I will say, at first, it was very difficult to do. I rolled my eyes every time I did it. I was like, again, this is the fifth time in 8 minutes. But now, when I start, because I still do struggle with depression, I'm still in therapy. And now it's a habit. If I start to get that, like, oh, maybe I'm an awful mother, I'm an awful friend, I'm an awful person, I'm like, is that useful? No? Okay, let me move on. Like, I'm
Yes.
grateful to have the friendships I have, type of thing. So I would
Uh,
say that's another really good technique to use.
yes. And it takes time, really. And so be patient as well. But as long as you take these baby steps, moving towards your goal, your destination, and that's your dream, just go ahead. You are still achieving what you want to achieve in life. So, what are your plans now or your goals for the next 12 months?
So my ultimate goal with opening my business is to empower 1 million women to learn women's self-defense. I believe that by changing the way we as women approach self-defense and personal protection is how we start to stay more safe in a society that likes to victimize us. And what I mean by that is we have always thought and been taught to think of self-defense as a physical reaction to an attack. But the way I teach is that self-defense is prevention. Start by preventing, recognizing the red flags before you get in the abusive relationship, and having the confidence to walk away will mean you never have to fight off that abuser because you never got involved with him. So my ultimate goal, empower 1 million women. And over the next 12 months, my goal is to do one public speaking gig a month and to do one podcast interview a week so that I can begin to build my social media platforms and I can reach more women and encourage them to take their own personal protection into their hands and go and do a women's self-defense class. And I always encourage women to do a women's self-defense class taught by women. And if they can, a trauma-informed women's self-defense class. Almost every woman I've ever spoken to has a story of sexual assault in some way. And so when you go to a traditional self-defense school and you got Chad the muscle man trying to choke you, it's scary and it can be traumatizing and you can actually re-traumatize yourself. So if you can, trauma-informed, female-led women's self-defense class.
Okay. So do you also have some kind of like a session in your or besides the martial arts thing, the taekwondo? Do you have like a regular session to meet with your clients who have experienced domestic physical abuse or any type of abuse?
I do. I do personal small group workshops. I
Mm-hmm.
work for corporations a lot where I come in and I teach your employees how to build more confidence, how to protect themselves in a dangerous situation. And I also work at one of my local gyms every Friday night, 6 to 8 p.m. I do an introductory course to women's self-defense. And I'm beginning to slowly build those into having more available. And I also am in the progress or in process of working on an online women's self-defense program that you can learn at your own convenience with resources on what to do if you become triggered during the session. A lot of times, like for me, I didn't know what triggers were when I started this business. And my ex-abuser, he would choke me. That was the thing that he would do to give himself power and control over me. And so I decided that the way I was going to handle what I was feeling without understanding trauma or triggers was that I was just going to find every way to get out of a chokehold. That way, no man could ever put me in such a vulnerable position again. That did not go over well. I became very triggered. It began to affect every part of my mental health. And I ended up very quickly in therapy because what I have found since then is that when you have trauma, you don't remember it, you relive it. Mm-hmm. And when you relive the trauma, now you're re-triggered again. So essentially what I was doing to myself in those weeks was I was reliving the most traumatic moments of my life over and over again, thinking that I was doing something positive for myself. So my course and even my website has resources for women to go to look up so that they know, one, they're not alone, and two, there are things that you can do when you feel that type of trigger and that type of trauma trigger.
Wonderful. So what do you think would be the major roadblock for you from achieving your goal or your goals?
The major roadblock for me right now is time management. I just recently got diagnosed with ADHD, so finding productive ways to use my time has been a major roadblock and is a very challenging. I get distracted very easily, and I've had to learn how to completely change my routines and the way that I live my life in order to be more ADHD friendly. So that's my big roadblock right now, is just time management and being productive with the time that I have.
Mm-hmm. So your therapy helps you in terms of how to manage your time, prioritize your work or your the tasks that you have to accomplish. Yeah.
Absolutely. I also bought multiple books and I listened to podcasts and TED Talks about how a late diagnosed woman can handle life with an ADHD friendly life, I should say. They can handle an ADHD friendly life because neurotypically, right, you're not taught what to do when you're so distracted all the time. And I always thought that I just needed to try harder and do better and be better. And that also affected my self-confidence because I'm like, why can I not get this? Like I can train for a black belt, no problem. But, when it comes to writing this paper, I've spent 12 hours sitting there staring at the paper doing nothing. And so in my therapy, I'm in EMDR therapy, and that's basically when you reprocess these memories in a way that you can understand and you can heal from in real time. And as part of that, it's controlling my emotions and helping me get grounded and get back focused to what I need to focus on.
Okay, great. So one last, before we end, what would be your one simple advice to our listeners?
One simple advice is to always understand that you are entitled to your own boundaries. You are entitled to take up space. And your value and worth is predicated on how you feel about yourself. You get to define your value and your worth. Nobody else gets to tell you what you're worth and what your value is. So my one takeaway, you define that. Nobody else gets to define it for you.
I agree, because you have that power to create the life you love. As long as you believe, as long as you are not being controlled by the circumstances and the conditions surrounding you. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Elicia, for this time and for sharing your story, for being vulnerable. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners were able to get so much value in what you're doing right now. Would you like to, how will they be able to connect with you?
If you would like to connect with me, you can find me on my website at www.prettyhandshardpunches.com, or you can find me across any social media at prettyhandshardpunches.com. Okay. Or I'm sorry, Pretty Hands Hard Punches.
Or they could also look for you under Elicia Ibarra or
Yeah, if you Google me under Elicia Ybarra, you'll find my podcast interviews, my website, anything like that.
okay, wonderful. So thank you so much, Elisa, for being my guest at this in this episode, and I wish you all the best. And I know you'll be able to reach that 1 million women whom you'd like to empower. And again, thank you for your time with us. For our listeners, wait for the next episode, and goodbye to all. Till next time. Bye.